Well, as hope fades of finding people alive, the world's attention is turning to those who survived the massive earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria. The United Nations is appealing for $1 billion to address the growing humanitarian crisis. Nearly 2 weeks on, millions in both countries remain displaced. People are sleeping outdoors and living without food, water or toilets, raising fears of further disaster from disease. Many Syrian refugees are even choosing to return to the war-torn country they fled, lining up at border crossings with whatever belongings they managed to salvage. Anger is growing in northern Syria over the late arrival of aid following the earthquake. In the critical days after the quakes, when many survivors could have been rescued, the area was largely cut off from the outside world. Even now, residents complain of a lack of help. The United Nations is also under fire for failing to act in the midst of Syria's complex divisions.
What 12 years of civil war left standing has now fallen victim to the earthquake. Large parts of Idlib province have been reduced to rubble. This area is controlled by a jihadist alliance that the UN classes as a terrorist organisation. The Syrian government controls 2/3 of the country. The northeast, shown here in dark blue, is under Kurdish control. But it's the northwest that's been hardest hit by the quake. The area around Idlib under the jihadist rebels, and the area in light blue that's controlled by pro-Turkish forces. The UN normally uses just one border crossing to get aid from Turkey to Syria, but it was initially rendered impassable by the quake. The White Helmets rescue group that operates in Syria's rebel-held areas appealed for heavy machinery to rescue survivors, but to no avail. UN aid is now flowing from Turkey after the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad agreed to open additional border crossings. But critics say the UN shouldn't have waited for approval from Damascus, given the government doesn't control the area anyway. Government-controlled areas like here in the city of Aleppo have received more aid, much of it from other Arab countries that long shunned Assad. Critics say the earthquake could even work in Assad's favour and strengthen his hand. Those left in the ruins in rebel-held areas just want help, but find themselves caught in a political tug-of-war for which they're paying a high price.
All right, well, for more on the situation in Syria, I'm joined by Kristen Hellberg, a journalist and an expert on Syria. Welcome to DW. So UN aid is now flowing from Turkey to Syria through more crossings, but will that be enough?
It is by far not enough. What we are hearing from northern Syria is that clinics and hospitals are really running out of medical supplies. There's a lack of baby powder in the region. What we've seen so far are 114 trucks by the UN crossing into northern Syria for a population of almost 4 million in need. So this is not enough. And we are hearing some assessment reports that are saying that 88% of the Syrian earthquake victims live in the opposition-held territories, while 12% live in the regime-held territories. But on the other hand, it is 90% of the international aid that is going to the regime. So it's a quite unfair distribution of aid.
Yeah, it sounds like a very difficult situation, to say the least. So critics say the earthquakes could actually even work in President Bashar al-Assad's favour. Why is that?
It is already working in his favor. The Syrian regime is trying to use this disaster to normalize ties with other countries because the Syrian regime has been isolated for 12 years now because of its brutal war against the people inside Syria. So what we are seeing is that the Arab neighboring states are really opening up to President Assad. We have seen some foreign ministers traveling to Damascus, for example, the foreign minister of Jordan for the first time. Assad is now waiting even for the Saudi foreign minister which would be a real turning point, because Saudi Arabia, together with Qatar, is one of the harshest critics of the Syrian regime. There might even be a chance of entering the Arab League soon, because there will be a summit by the end of March in Saudi Arabia. So this is not the end of international isolation, as we see Western countries like the US and the EU still refraining from normalizing ties, but there is rehabilitation going on within the Arab world.
Tell us this. Is it not possible for Western governments to help the people in Syria without actually supporting Assad?
Then, which is problematic, because the majority of the state is reaching the regime. But there's a possibility to support international non-governmental organizations who have local partners on the ground. The problem is that all these organizations need to work through the 3 authorized border crossings from Turkey into Syria. And the procedures there are being controlled by the UN, and they are being very complicated. These international NGOs who have been helping in the affected areas for several years now with their humanitarian responses, they have complained even before the earthquake about all the paperwork. So what needs to be done is more pressure on the UN to ease these procedures, to make it easier to deliver aid into the regions and to really scale up this aid to the scale of the disaster that we are seeing inside Syria.
Syria expert Kristen Hellberg, thank you.
My pleasure.